So in this tutorial, we are going to continue from where we stopped in managing roles and privileges in Spring Boot. And just to remind you that this is exactly what we are trying to achieve, to be able to have a page like this where we can select a user and be able to assign him roles and privileges as we wish. So this is what we are trying to achieve, to be able to manage user permissions and also be able to protect our endpoint or our REST API. So we've been able to create, in the previous tutorial, we've created all our controllers for the roles, for the privileges, and for assigning roles and privileges. If you miss out the first class, please go back and watch, because that is a prerequisite for this class. And this is where we stopped in the last tutorial. I'd also like to remind you to subscribe to my channel if you've not subscribed, so that you don't miss any update from me. And right now, I'm going to go ahead to commit the changes. So once I commit these changes, so that will mean that everything we've done in the previous tutorial is now available on GitHub. So I'm going to create the inventory REST API controllers. So I'm going to push them to GitHub so that you can actually have it if you want. So I'm going to commit and push. That should be it. Commit and push. Yes. So all these changes of the previous classes, they are now available on GitHub. The link to my GitHub repository for this project is in the description of this video. So let's go ahead to start testing this application. So I'm going to let's start with the roles, and we are going to use our Swagger UI. I think we can start with either roles or privilege. So privilege, we've been able to create one, right? And let's create another one. I'm going to call this one View Product. So I'm going to execute, and I think it worked. View product. And of course, if I go to privileges, localhost 8080 privileges, let me see. Of course, we can also check it with Swagger. So we expect to see 2 privileges. Okay, we have the API version, so /API/v1, I think. And now you can see we have 2 privileges. So the insert works for privileges. And let's go ahead to do an edit. So let's do an edit. I'm going to copy this privilege to, let me see. Let's see. So first let's do a get. So let's do a get on privileges. I'm going to do a get, execute. And this is the response. So I'm going to just copy this and let's do a put request. So I'm going to copy this. We are going to do a put request, and the put request body, try it out, and the body, we are going to use this. So it's going to be ID of 1, and let's change the create product to create product. So I think we can just run the put request without making any change. Let's just see if it works. So I'm going to just click on execute. It worked. So we have the 200. Okay, so the put request works. Let's try the get by ID. So it's going to be get by ID. And I'm going to use an ID of, let's try it out, ID of 2, for instance, and I'm going to execute. And it gave a response 200, and it retrieved the privilege of 2. And the last thing we want to try is delete. I think delete should work. Go to delete and ID of 2, try it out. ID of 2, let's delete and see, execute. It worked. Okay, so it deleted, right? That's fine. So if I go back to refresh, I'm going to have only 1 privilege right here. Okay, so privilege works. Let's now go try role. Okay, before I try role, I'm going to go to roles, and nothing is there. And let's go to Swagger UI, and then we can add 1 or 2 roles. Okay, these are role controller right here. Role controller, yeah, right here. So get, I'm going to try it out, execute, and we have empty. Okay, so this works. Let's do we have a put for role? Yeah, post. Okay, so post for roles, I think the only thing we need is the description, right? So I'm going to go to posts, and I'm going to try it out. And I believe the only thing we need is description. So I'm going to just remove every other thing. Do we need details? Yes, maybe. And I'm going to remove the editing columns. Okay, so description is, let's call this admin, or we call this maybe, let's see one of the roles we have here. So let's go back to our UI. So one of the roles is inventory manager. So I'm going to create the inventory manager role. And that will be the description, inventory manager. And the details, actually always we want to put underscore. The details is manages inventory. Okay, so let's try to do execute post for roles. Parameter string value must be a valid JSON. So I have an error here. So I'm going to take out that comma. I'm going to execute again. And we have 200. Okay, so meaning that our roles are worked. Maybe we just add one more as well. Let's call this supplier. So let's see. What other role do we have? We have sales manager, right? Sales manager. So let's create sales manager role. Sales manager manages sales, whatever, maybe orders, okay. And I'm going to execute, and it worked. And of course, now we have two roles. If we refresh, we have two roles, okay. Okay, the next thing we want to talk about is maybe the edits, which is the put. So hopefully that works as well. So I'm not going to go ahead to try it. Okay, so the main controller methods is this ones I've outlined here, which is save privileges, right? So I want to take some privileges and assign it to a user. So first, let's look at our users. First, let's see that our users don't have any privileges, because you can see privileges for this user is empty. And of course, if we go to user controller, which is this. So what we are saying here is, if we do a get for all users, for instance, right here. Okay, so we have a lot of things, but the privileges is empty. So we want to assign this user some privileges. How do we do it? We are going to go get privileges from privileges. So let's get some privileges here. Let's see. So let's see, we have this privilege here, and we are going to assign it to the user. Okay, so let's see. So let's go back here. So to assign a user a privilege, according to this guide, we send a list of privileges to /user/the user ID and send him a list of privileges. So first we want to know the user that is out there. So I'm going to assign user1, user with ID of 1, some privileges. So let's see, let's go back. So I'm going to assign user with ID of 1 some privileges, and this is done /user/ID privileges, but it's right there in the user privilege assignment controller. So let's go to the user privilege assignment controller. Right here, user privilege assignment controller. I think it should be here. Oh no. So let's go check where we have the methods where we have user privileges. Is in user privilege assignment controller, and it's this method right here. It takes, this is user ID, this is a get, but we want a post to assign a user a set of privileges. So it's going to be this one, okay? So it's going to be in user privilege assignment controller. So that's actually where we are. So we have a problem because we don't see this user/user ID/privileges. So I'm going to go ahead to restart this application. Okay, so we have error somewhere. So let's see where it is coming from. Oh, so we have delete mapping. Okay, so here we actually have should have clear at the end. User ID privileges clear. So this is the problem. So let's go ahead to save and rerun. So this is what we got it wrong. And actually this method should be, I think it should be a put, but I made it a delete. So I made it a delete. It should have been a put, because when we are clearing item, we are updating the user details or user object to remove privileges. But I think either way works. Okay, so let's run the application one more time. So we have the get users by privilege should return users, right? So this is going to be returning users. Get users by privilege should return users. Given the privilege ID, we want to return all the users in the privilege. Okay, so let's run to see what we have. Okay, so everything started well. So let's go to continue from where we stopped. We are trying to now save privileges, right? So we have privileges. We want to assign it to a user. So the privileges, they are right here. And I'm going to copy this privilege. So list of privileges, we want to assign it to a user. And in this case, it's only one single privilege in the list. So let's go to our Swagger UI. I'm going to refresh. At this point, we should be able to see the endpoint that we need, which is user/id/privileges. So it should be in the assignment. So let me find it. Assignment. So right here. So user ID privileges, right here, and it's going to be a post. We're going to try it out, and the user ID is 1, and the privilege is the privilege I've just, oh no, so this is the privilege right here, right? So let's see. So the response body will be a list. Let's go check. Let's see, the response body will be a list, right? Okay, it will be a list of privileges. And in this case, it's a list of 1, right? So I'm going to execute, and it seems it worked. It gave us a response of 201, okay, and you can see that privileges were saved successfully. Now, if we go to privileges, it's still okay. Why do we have this? API/v1/users. Okay, so let's try privileges. So no default constructor for entity user models user privilege assignment. So let's go to add those constructors. So user privilege assignment model, we need to add no-args constructor and the all-args constructor as well. So we are going to just add no-args and an all-args constructor, and this should solve the problem. So I'm going to restart it. So the privileges were assigned to the user. And let's see now that if we fetch the user object, it will come with the privileges assigned to it. So let's go back to our Swagger UI, and let's go to, this time I'll go to users, and let's see. By the way, I can actually go from here. So privileges. So there is a problem, exactly what I was talking about. We are going to solve these problems right now. So it's called the problem of infinite recursion. So this is just one privilege, but we are having all these. Let's try users, and we have the same problem. Okay, so let's go solve the problem of infinite recursion. So we have this problem at this point between the user and the privilege. We cannot even get to the end of it. So the first thing we want to do, so we have it between user and privilege. So I'm going to close other tabs. I'm going to open only the 2 models that have this problem, user and privilege. In the case of the privilege, we may not need to have this. We are going to take out the user field, because in the privilege, we don't need the user field. The mapping is complete when we have this right here. So we don't actually need the user field. We don't need the user field in the privilege class. Okay, let's go to the user, and we're also going to make a change. But before then, we also need to annotate the role with, because we are going to have the same problem with roles. So we are going to annotate this with @JSON back reference. If you annotate this many to one side with back reference, you're also going to annotate the one to many side with managed reference. So in this case, we are going to role. That's where we are going to, and the privilege we are going to annotate with @JSON managed reference. So you put JSON managed reference in the many to one to many side, and JSON back reference in the many to one side. So the next thing we want to do, we are going to add to both classes JSON identity info. JSON identity info is going to be generator is equal to object generator objects generator dot import it first. So it's going to be the property generator dot class. The property is going to be the ID. So basically, I can't explain this perfectly, but it tells Jackson is JSON serializer for Spring, to use the ID to track the relationship and be able to avoid recursion before once it begins to occur. So we are going to copy this across to all our classes that we use for mapping. So I'm going to paste this in all the classes. Okay, now let's run the application and let's see. Oh, one more thing. So let's go back to privilege. So we've added, so in the case of the privilege, we are going to ignore the user privilege assignment. So here I'm going to add at JSON ignore. Actually, if you can't follow all this, you are free to get the complete code after I check it in. It's a bit tricky to know exactly when to do what, but just follow exactly the procedure I'm following right now. Okay, so let's summarize what we did. What we did is we added JSON managed reference and JSON back reference to the role ID because role contain privileges, right? And privileges contain users, and users contain privileges as well. So we have to add JSON managed reference and JSON back reference to the relationship between role and privilege. And in case of all the classes, we are adding the JSON identity info to all the classes. And we also added a JSON ignore to the users field of the privilege. So let's go ahead to restart this and let's see what we have. So I'm going to restart. Okay, so let's go to refresh this page. Okay, so this makes more sense at this point. So we have the user. Now we've assigned this user a privilege, right? So if you take a look at the privilege section, you can see the privilege we assigned this user right here, which is a create product privilege. And if we also go to privileges, it's also fine. Now we have everything we need. Now the role ID for this privilege is null. We didn't give it any role because we currently think we do have a role, right? So we are going to update this privilege to assign a role to this privilege, and the role we are going to assign it, the create product role, may be the, let's see what roles are there. So let's add the inventory manager role to the privilege. So inventory manager role is on ID 1. To the create product privilege, I'm going to add the ID of 1. So let's go to the privilege, and then we are going to do a put on the privilege. Yeah, privilege controller. We are going to do a put on privilege 1, right? And we are going to assign it role 1. So I'm going to put on privilege 1. So here we have privilege 1, put on privilege 1. So I'm going to try it out and I'm going to say privilege 1. This is privilege 1, right? And the privilege 1, we want to assign it a role. So let's get privilege 1. This is privilege 1. And I'm going to just copy the body here and specify it in the body. And I'm going to paste it here. So I'm going to assign it a role ID of 1, meaning that I'm assigning it the role ID of 1, which is the inventory manager role. So I'm going to go ahead to execute. And it seems, 200, okay. So this worked. See, I think it worked, 200. Okay, yeah, okay. Don't know why it colored pink. I was thinking it did not work. So if I refresh this now, you see that it has a role ID of 1. Okay, but this is not all. So let's go and test other things. We now want to get user by privileges. We want to get, given a user ID, we want the privileges for that user. So user ID, user/1/privileges for that user. So let's see, user ID 1 privileges. Let's see. So let's do it right here. So let's go to user controller, and it's going to be user ID privileges. We don't have it, really. Let's go check what is happening here. Okay, so we have a problem here. Required URI variable user ID for method parameter type long is not present. User ID is not present. Okay, so let's troubleshoot where this is coming from. So let's first go to user ID, user ID privileges. So I'm going to hit the enter key and it gives us the same problem. Okay, type long is not present. So let's go to our user controller. Actually, it's in the user assignment controller, user ID privileges, which is this one. So the variable name here is user ID. Actually, I'm using ID here instead of user ID. Okay, so this is the problem. So I'm going to save everything and then let's go check where the problem comes and let's go see what we have. Hopefully this is going to solve the problem. So let's see where we are. So we are currently in the second one. So we still have about 5 more to go. Okay, so Tomcat started well on port 8080. So let's go to user ID privileges. I'm going to hit enter key and it gets it, right? So it gets me the privileges for that user. So what I'm going to do now is to can actually create one more privilege and assign it to the user, but that will be a waste of time. So the second method works. So let's look at another one. Get users in privilege. So /privilege/ID/users. So let's see what users in privilege 1 or have privilege 1. So I'm going to say /user/ID /privilege/ID/users. Privilege ID users. So let's go check. So privilege ID users is this is user ID privileges, but we need privilege ID users. User ID privileges. Oh, we also have user ID users. So it's actually user ID users, user ID and users. It actually should have been privilege ID users. So let's go change it in the controller method. So we have this one, get users by privilege is going to be privilege ID users. So I'm going to restart the application. When we go to privilege ID users, it gives us all the users in that privilege. So the logic is correct, but the naming is the URL naming is where the problem is. So privilege ID users, hit enter key, and we don't have anything. Privilege ID method is not there. So this is actually going to be privilege ID, and I'm going to go ahead to restart. So while it restarts, we are going to check the next item on the line. The next item on the line is clear assigned privileges. Okay, so we are going to do that. So right now, Tomcat started on port 8080, and we are going to say privilege ID users, and we have the users. Actually, one single user, and that is me, that has a privilege. So this is the user having privilege 1. Okay, so what is the next one? The next one is, let's see, will be to clear assigned privileges. So it's a put request to user ID privileges clear. So that will be an easy one. So user ID privilege clear. User ID privilege clear, which is this one. So we want to clear all the privileges assigned to user 1. By the way, how many users do we have in this application? Let's see. I think we should have more than one user. Okay, let's see. So we have 2 users, right? Okay, so the second user has no privileges. You can see right here. So user ID privilege clear. I want to clear the privileges assigned to user 1, and it's going to be this one. User ID privilege clear. User ID privileges clear, and it's going to be user 1. I want to clear the privileges, and I'm going to execute. Response privilege cleared successfully. And if we go to check the users, both of them will have no privileges assigned, right? As you can see, no privileges. Okay, so we are making progress. Now we want to assign role to a user, right? Assign role to a user. First, let's see what roles we have. So we have roles. We have 2 roles. Actually, 1 role. Oh, there are 2 roles. Okay. So we have the role of sales manager with a single privilege. So let's assign the role of sales manager So that role is role ID 1. So I'm going to simply create one more privilege, view product, and assign it to sales manager role so that we have 2 privileges under sales manager role. So let's go to create one privilege, and then we are going to have the role ID of that privilege to be the role one ID of 1. So I'm going to look for privilege controller, and we want to do a post, and we only need description. So let's click on try it out, and we need only the description, I think. Actually, I'm going to just click almost everything. So we need description. The description is going to be view products. Okay, let's say view orders. Role ID is going to be 1. Description. So I'm going to create this privilege, and it's assigned to role ID 1, and it worked. So if we check our roles now, we have that the role 1 should have 2 privileges under it, right? And we want to assign, let's see what users we have. I want to assign user 2, which is admin, the role of inventory manager, which is role 1. This is user ID 2. I want to assign him role 1. And if I assign him role 1, it's going to assign him all the privileges under that role. So to do that, we are going to also go to the assignments, which is this one. And we are going to user ID. Do I even remember? Oh, I think that should be role controller, it should be role controller, not privilege assignment. So we are posting role ID, assign user ID, and the role is role 1, and the user ID is user 2, right? So I'm going to go ahead to try it out. Role is role 1. I'm assigning to user 2. And this is going to be important because this, I think it happens in a transaction, I think. So let's click on execute, and it says, okay, I think it worked. So the only way to check if it works, let's go to check user 2 and see what privileges apply to is assigned to user 2. I'm going to just refresh the page. If I now go to user 2, you can see user 2 have 2 privileges assigned to him, as you can see right here. Okay, so the next one is unassign all privileges in a role. So in this case, we are trying to unassign. So the thing what we are simply going to change is the unassign string in the route. So instead of assign, we have unassign. So let's go to do that. Unassign, okay. So the role ID, I'm going to click on try first. The role ID is role 1, and we want to unassign role 1 from user 2, right? And let's execute. And it says, okay, 200, okay, so it unassigned. So if I go to check, if I refresh, it's going to unassign these 2 privileges from that user. I'm going to refresh, and you can see, oh, it didn't work. Okay, so let's go check. Let's troubleshoot. Okay, so everything is okay from back end. So I'm going to user 2 privileges, and I should see empty. Yes, it unassigned. User 2. Oh, no, it should be user 2. Oh, the privileges are still there. So it didn't unassign actually. So let's take a look at our logic here. Delete privileges. It should be in role controller. It should be here. And it says unassign is going to be this. Unassign role. Okay, so this is where the logic happens. Okay, so I'm going to use another delete method in the repository. So we are going to create another method that deletes by user ID and role ID. So I'm going to say public void. Actually, that will be in the assignment repository. So we are going to write a method that deletes by role ID and user ID. So it's going to delete all those assignments based on the user ID and the privilege ID, right? User ID and privilege ID. So I'm going to say public void delete by user ID and privilege ID, okay? And this is going to say take long user ID and long privilege ID. So user ID and privilege ID, it delete by user ID and privilege ID. So we are going to delete several. So I'm going back to the role service, and we are going to, instead of deleting all, we are going to make a little change. So here we are going to map through the privileges, and we are going to delete by user ID and privilege ID. So for each of them, so this is going to not return anything, so it's going to be void. So we are going to stream a map, and we are not doing a to list. We are going to do a delete. So we are going to say privilege repository assignment repository.delete by user ID and privilege ID. And we have the user ID and privilege.get ID, okay? Instead of mapping, we can actually do dot for each. So we use a dot for each. I think that will be much better. I think this should be fine at this time. So one thing it may ask us is to use transaction, but I think we might not need that. So I'm going to go ahead to restart this application. So for each of the privilege, we are going to just delete the assignment based on the user ID and the privilege ID. And I'm going to clear the console because I'm curious to know what logs out on the console. So let's go back to our UI, and we are going to refresh our Swagger. Of course, that doesn't change a thing. I'm going to also refresh this, and we want to delete, try it out. We are given a role ID of 1 and user ID of 2. Execute, and it says 500 internal server error. I think this will have to do with transactions. So let's see. No entity manager with actual transaction, you can see. So it requires transaction. So what we are going to do to solve this problem, we are going to go to the role service, and we are going to annotate this method with a transactional. We're also going to annotate this service method with a transactional. And the same thing goes for the controller where we are calling this from. So where we have this unassign, we are going to annotate with a transactional, and we're also going to annotate this REST controller with a transactional. And at this point, I'm going to just restart the application, and this will, I'm sure, will solve the problem. The reason we need transaction is because we are doing a batch delete of several objects. And I'm going to go ahead to clear this console because I also want to see what displays on this console. So let's go back to our Swagger UI. I'm going to refresh, and I'm going to try to delete again. And this time it's going to be the same. Role ID of 1 and user ID of 2 executes. And hopefully this works. It says 200 OK, and this should solve the problem. So if I refresh this, you can see that the privileges are gone now. So this is how we can solve this problem. So instead of using a different method, you simply create the repository method that deletes by user ID and privilege ID. That also solves the problem. Okay, let's see where we are. So we've solved the problem, and we've gotten all the way up to this place. So we also have one more, get privileges in role. I think we already have that, get privileges in role. So if I go to role once, and I want to get the privileges there, and we have the privileges in that role. So everything works. So everything about our controllers is now perfectly okay. And I think the next thing we are going to be doing now, we are going to be going straight into granted authorities. Let's now see how we can use this information to protect our REST API based on these roles. And let's see how we can assign these roles, convert these privileges into granted authorities in actual Spring Boot security configuration, and see how we can use it to restrict access to different API endpoints. I'd like to stop here. It's not been easy, but I'd like to thank you for getting this far. I'd like to also remind you to subscribe to my channel. If you've not subscribed, subscribe so that you don't miss any updates. If you have any challenges following my classes, please leave me a comment below. And also, if you want to support me, great. Click on the thanks button. There's a thanks there. Click on it so that you support me. We are going to see in the next part.